An application state is how it synchronizes data among its components. There are two main types of state. Local state is the data we manage inside a component, which can only affect that particular component. An example would be a menu that's activated with a button. The second is global state, which is data that affects more than one component or even an entire application. An example would be a user's authentication status. In the Context API video, we learned that we can provide data from a component, then access it anywhere else in the component tree. This makes it a perfect state management solution for small applications. But, as an application or its team grows, managing state with the Context API can become more challenging. Components can become bloated with data that's necessary for other components, but not for itself. It can also quickly become confusing where a component state is changed, which can lead to unpredictable behavior, especially in larger development teams. This unpredictable behavior is error-prone because a developer can accidentally update the wrong state or miss an important update to a state. The Svelte Store is a full state management solution that helps developers overcome these challenges by helping us manage our state. It detaches the state from a component and manages it in an entirely different place so components can't become bloated with unnecessary data. It's also more predictable. There are clear rules to how a state should be managed, updated, and synced. And because we have that clearly defined flow of data through the application, it's less error-prone. A store is just a plain JavaScript file that we import into any component that needs access to it. In Svelte, there are three types of stores. A Readable Store is a store where the values inside it are read-only. A Writable Store is a store where the values inside it can be modified. And a Custom Store is a store where the values can be derived from other stores. The Readable and Writable stores each have a corresponding method that we use to create the store values. And of course, the values can be anything, like an object, array, etc. A Writable Store is probably the most common one you'll use, so that's where we'll start. In the source directory, we'll create a new folder called Store. Inside the folder, we'll create a new file called cart.js. A Writable Store's method is writable, so at the top of the file, import writable from svelte/store. Then, we'll define a constant called cart and use the writable method as its value. In the parameter list, we'll define the default value as an array of objects. Each object contains an item that a user can add to their cart. So, ID 1, name item 1, and price 10. Then the second object, ID 2, name item 2, price $9.99. Finally, we export default the cart that we just created. And that's it. That's all we need to do to create a store. Once we have a store, we can read its data by subscribing to it in any component where we want to use that data. Subscribing creates an ongoing subscription to the store that will read its data and inform us of any changes to it. To subscribe to a store, we use the subscribe method on an imported store. The method takes a callback as its argument, where we process the data. As an example, let's subscribe to our cart store in the root app component. We'll start by importing the cart store, so import cart from store cart.js. Then, we subscribe to the store with cart.subscribe. And we'll call our data cart items. We want to loop over the items in an array, so let's create one called items. Then, we'll assign our store data to that array. Items equals cart items. In the markup, we'll type each and select the each key block. We do items array as item. And for the key, we'll use items.id. And of course, this comma shouldn't be there. As the output, we'll do a paragraph. Bind item.name, then a dash, $, and bind item.price. If we save and head over to the browser, we'll see our items, with their prices, on the page. So, we successfully accessed the store values. If a component is subscribed to a store, we'll need to ensure that it always unsubscribes as well. Every time the component is mounted, it subscribes to the store. If the component is instantiated and destroyed multiple times, it could cause a memory leak. One way we could unsubscribe from a store is to use the onDestroy lifecycle hook to explicitly terminate the subscription. All we need to do is assign the subscription to a constant, then pass it to the onDestroy hook as an argument. This is a perfectly valid approach and fine to use in your project. The problem, though, is that we'll need to do this for every component that subscribes to a store. This can become a pain, or we could even forget and cause a memory leak. Luckily, we can let Svelte manage the subscribing and unsubscribing for us. To do that, we simply prefix the store import with a $sign wherever we want to use the data. As an example, let's change our root app component to use a managed subscription instead of a manual one. So, all we do is replace the items array in the loop with $cart. Then, we'll remove the subscription completely. If we save and switch over to the browser, the cart items still show. But now we don't have to worry about memory leaks, and as a bonus, the code is much leaner. Svelte provides us with two methods to change a store's data. The set method replaces the data with new values. The update method gives us the current store data, which allows us to add, edit, or delete values. For our example, we're going to add a new component that will be responsible for changing the store data. So, in the source directory, new folder, components, then, new file. And let's call it manage_store.svelte. The component will import cart from store cart.js because we're going to change the cart item values. We'll add a button that says change data. On click of the button, it will reference a function called change data. We'll add the function to the script section, but leave it empty for now. We'll implement the functionality in a bit. In the root app component, we'll import manage store from components manage_store.svelte. Then in the markup, we'll instantiate it above the loop. If we save and go over to the browser, we'll see the new button above the items. As we mentioned before, the set method will override the data from the store with whatever new data we specify. This also includes a different type of value. To use it, we call the method on the imported store and specify the new data as an argument. For our example, we'll use the set method on the cart. So, in the manage store component, we'll say cart.set and set the new value to an empty array. If we go to the browser and click on the button, the two cart items disappear. So the previous array was overridden with the new empty array. And because there are no items to loop over, it won't display anything. As we mentioned, the update method gives us the previous data to modify. To do that, it takes a callback as an argument, which gives us the data as a parameter. The callback then needs to return the data we modified. As a demonstration, we'll add another item to our existing cart array. We'll start by replacing the set method with update. Then, we specify items as the current data in the callback. From the callback, we'll return a new array and spread the existing items into it with the spread syntax. If we don't add the previous items back into the new array, they'll be lost. Then, we can add another item with ID 3, name item 3, and price $1.99. If we head over to the browser and click the button, it will add the new item and show it below the others. We can create our own custom stores by adding functionality on top of regular stores. For example, we can create a function that adds an item to a cart. Then, we can just use the function each time we need to add an item, instead of manually modifying the code. This can make it much easier and faster to interact with a regular store. If we want to create a custom store, we need an existing one. It can be a readable or writable one, it doesn't matter, but it needs to exist so that the custom store can subscribe to it. To do that, we create an object that subscribes to the regular store in the subscribe option. Following that, but still inside the object, we can add our own custom logic. Then, instead of exporting the regular store, we export our custom store with the added functionality. For our demonstration, we'll create a custom store that subscribes to the cart store. Then we'll create a function that adds a new item to the cart, the same way we did earlier. We already have our regular store, so let's create a constant called custom store with an object. Inside the object, we'll add the subscribe option and cart.subscribe. Okay, now for the custom logic. It's going to be the same thing we did with the update method, just inside a function. So, a function called addItem that takes a new item as argument. Then, cart.update, and we'll get the current items in the store. Then we'll return a new array, spreading the current items first. Then, we'll add the new item that comes from the argument. Finally, we'll change the export from cart to the custom store. So, instead of writing the update logic each time we want to update the store, we can simply call the addItem method and pass a new item to it. In our case, that would be in the changeData function, in the manage_store component. So let's change the import from cart to custom store and remove the update. Then we can use our new function. So, custom store.addItem and an object with ID 3, name item 3, and price $1.99. If we switch over to the browser and click the button, the custom store updates the cart store, and we see the new item. This is a more elegant approach and will not only save us a lot of time, but eliminate any mistakes we might make. Another type of store is the Readable Store. A Readable Store means that any interaction from the user can't set the value. Readable stores are typically used for auto-generated values that should be updated regularly, like a timer or geolocation. A readable store uses the readable method and takes two arguments. The first is the default value, and the second is a callback function that we can use to set new values. When we say set new values, we mean in a limited way. We can't set new values from a user interaction, like we did in the Writable Store earlier. For our example, we'll modify the cart store and create a timer that updates a counter variable. So, we'll start by changing the import to use the readable method and remove everything else. Then, we'll create a variable called counter with an initial value of 0. For the store, we define a constant called timer and set it to the readable method. The default value will be counter and new value for the callback parameter. Then, we'll use setInterval to create the timer. Then, we invoke new value, which should increment the counter by 1. For the timing, we can use 1 second. And then finally, we'll export default, the timer. In the root app component, we'll clear everything out, then import timer from store cart.js. And in the markup, we'll create a heading that says counter and auto-subscribes, timer. If we save and head over to the browser, we'll see the counter incrementing each second. So, the new value is set, but without any user interaction. In the next video, we'll learn how to build a Svelte application for production. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you again in the next one.